Close your eyes for a moment and imagine standing on the surface of our world, feeling the solid ground beneath your feet, the familiar weight of gravity holding you to this thin crust we call home, the whisper of wind across your skin as you breathe in the evening air that carries with it the scent of earth and growing things and the distant promise of rain. But what if I told you that everything you know, every thought that has ever crossed your mind, and every dream that has ever stirred your sleeping consciousness, exists only as the most fragile gossamer-thin layer stretched across something infinitely deeper, us, beneath the comfortable assumptions of surface existence, down through layers of reality that whisper of civilizations and consciousnesses and truths so profound that they exist beyond the reach of our everyday awareness. And if you find yourself questioning the very ground beneath your feet, then perhaps you've begun to hear the same whispers that have haunted humanity's deepest myths and most unsettling discoveries for millennia. The question that echoes beneath our feet is not whether we are alone in the universe, but whether we have ever truly understood what it means to exist at all. For what if humanity, in all its perceived grandeur and complexity, in all its towering achievements and desperate struggles and infinite capacity for both creation and destruction, is nothing more than a thin skin stretched across the surface of something so magnificent, so ancient, so utterly beyond our comprehension that we exist as mere surface dwellers, unaware that we are living upon the outermost membrane of a civilization that breathes in geological time and dreams in dimensions we cannot even imagine. This is not a question that demands an answer, but rather one that invites us to feel the weight of our assumptions, to recognize how much of what we take for granted about existence depends upon the thin layer of reality we can directly perceive. When we speak of solid ground, we mean the few meters of soil and rock that our feet can touch, but beneath that familiar surface lies a realm so vast and alien that it contains more mystery than all the distant galaxies combined. When we speak of the depths of human consciousness, we mean the thoughts and feelings and memories that rise to the surface of awareness. But beneath that familiar mental landscape lie depths that connect us to patterns and intelligences that predate individual existence by eons unmeasured. If you've ever stood at the edge of a deep canyon and felt a strange vertigo that had nothing to do with the fear of falling, if you've ever looked into still water at night and sensed something looking back from depths you could not fathom, if you've ever awakened from a dream with the lingering sensation that you had been somewhere far more real than the bedroom around you, then you have already begun to sense what lies at the heart of our exploration tonight. The recognition that the surface of things, no matter how solid and permanent it appears, is always and only the beginning of the story. Consider for a moment the very ground on which you stand, the Earth's crust that seems so solid, so permanent, so reassuringly stable beneath your feet as you walk through your daily life. This crust, this foundation of all human experience, this seemingly infinite expanse of continents and ocean floors. The crust would be thinner than the apple's skin, a gossamer boundary between the familiar world of surface existence and the vast, so intense they transform matter itself into states we can barely comprehend. The mathematics of this thinness become even more haunting when we consider that the habitable portion of this already impossibly thin crust extends only a few kilometers above and below sea level. the zone where liquid water can exist, where temperatures remain within the narrow range that allows organic chemistry to flourish, where atmospheric pressure permits the complex molecular dances that we call life. This habitable zone, this narrow band within which every human being who has ever lived has spent their entire existence, represents less than 1% of our planet's volume, a bubble of possibility so fragile that it exists only through the delicate balance of forces operating on scales we can barely imagine. Beneath this thin skin lies a world of such immense power and alien beauty that it operates according to laws and rhythms completely divorced from human experience. Tectonic plates drift like sleeping giants across the planet's surface, moving continents with the slow, inexorable patience of geological time, while deep beneath our feet, currents of liquid metal generate the magnetic field that shields us from cosmic radiation, creating the invisible bubble within which all life as we know it can exist. To marvel at the precise orchestration required to maintain such protection across billions of years. The deeper we descend through these hidden layers, the more we encounter conditions that would instantly annihilate any form of life we recognize. Liquid stone, chemical processes that operate according to rules unknown to surface chemistry. Yet these hostile depths make up more than 99% of our planet's volume, a vast realm as alien to us as the deepest reaches of space. To explore their wonders can only infer their nature from the subtle tremors and magnetic fluctuations and gravitational anomalies that reach the surface like coded messages from an unreachable world. What haunts the imagination is not merely the physical reality of these hidden depths, but the metaphorical implications of our surface existence. For if we truly grasp how thin and fragile our layer of reality is, how utterly dependent we are on conditions that exist only in this gossamer boundary between earth and sky, then we must confront the possibility that consciousness itself to the surface layer of something far more profound. Just as we cannot survive in the high atmosphere or the deep ocean without artificial life support, perhaps our ordinary consciousness cannot function in the deeper layers of reality without undergoing transformations that would fundamentally alter what we mean when we say I, or self, or human. The ancient myths whispered of worlds beneath worlds, of civilizations that existed in the deep places of the earth, where time moved differently and beings of immense wisdom dwelt in caverns lit by sources of light unknown to surface dwellers, where libraries carved from living crystal preserved knowledge accumulated over millions of years, where councils of the wise gathered to watch and guide the rise and fall of surface civilizations, like gardeners tending plants that bloom and fade with the seasons. Agartha, that legendary subterranean kingdom said to exist beneath the Himalayan mountains, where advanced beings maintained not only libraries but entire cities, built according to principles of harmony and balance that surface civilizations had forgotten, accessible only through hidden passages known to those who had learned to see beyond the veil of ordinary perception. Shambhala, the hidden valley spoken of in Tibetan Buddhist tradition, where enlightened masters preserved the deepest truths of existence in chambers carved from living rock, where the very architecture itself was designed to embody sacred geometry and create spaces that naturally induced states of expanded consciousness, where time itself flowed differently because the inhabitants had learned to exist in harmony with the deeper rhythms of planetary existence. These were not mere fantasies born of primitive imagination, but perhaps dim memories of a deeper truth, echoes of contact with layers of reality that exist parallel to, beneath, and beyond our everyday awareness, preserved in symbolic form by cultures that understood something about the layered nature of existence that our modern civilization has forgotten in its obsession with surface phenomena. Every culture on Earth has preserved stories of underworld realms, of journeys into the depths where heroes and mystics encountered beings of vast knowledge and terrifying power, where the normal rules of surface existence no longer applied, and consciousness itself could take forms unimaginable to those who had never ventured beyond the familiar boundaries of ordinary awareness. The Greek myths spoke of Hades not merely as a realm of the dead, but as a place where the deepest truths of existence were revealed to those brave enough to descend, where Persephone learned the secrets of both death and rebirth, where heroes like Orpheus and Theseus discovered powers within themselves that could only be awakened through contact with the depths. Norse mythology described the roots of Yggdrasil extending into multiple worlds beneath the surface reality, each layer containing different forms of consciousness and different ways of being. These mythic descriptions, repeated with remarkable consistency across cultures that had no contact with one another, suggest not simply the universal human tendency to imagine hidden realms, but perhaps the preservation of actual memory coded in symbolic language, of times when human consciousness had access to these deeper layers and could navigate between different levels of reality with the same ease that we now move between different rooms in a house. Archaeological discoveries continue to reveal the physical reality behind these myths. Beneath the surface of Cappadocia, in Turkey, lies a vast network of underground cities, capable of housing tens of thousands of people in chambers that extend down through multiple levels, connected by tunnels so extensive that many remain unexplored to this day, with ventilation systems so sophisticated that they could maintain fresh air circulation throughout the entire complex without any visible surface openings. Derinkuyu, the most famous of these subterranean cities, descends at least 8 levels deep, though some researchers believe additional levels remain sealed or undiscovered. With chambers large enough to hold entire communities, storage areas that could maintain food supplies for months or years, and worship spaces carved with symbols that combine Christian, Islamic, and far older motifs in ways that suggest these underground civilizations drew upon wisdom, traditions that transcended the religious divisions we take for granted on the surface. The precision of the carving, the complexity of the water and waste management systems, all point to knowledge and capabilities that we are only beginning to understand. These are not ancient ruins in the conventional sense. Understood something about the nature of reality that we, in our surface-bound existence, have forgotten. The decision to carve entire cities from solid rock, to create communities that could exist independently of surface conditions. A recognition that the depths offered something that surface existence could not provide. And if human civilizations could exist in such depths, if our own ancestors possessed the knowledge and motivation to create entire underground worlds, what might have developed in the far deeper layers, in the places where pressure and time transform matter and consciousness into forms we cannot even imagine. What civilizations might exist in the spaces between tectonic plates, in the vast caverns that honeycomb the deep crust, in dimensions of existence that intersect with our physical world but operate according to principles completely different from those governing surface reality. The more we discover that the boundary between inner and outer worlds is not merely geological, but psychological. Carl Jung's exploration of the collective unconscious revealed that human consciousness itself exists in layers, with the familiar ego awareness representing only the thinnest surface of a vast psychological landscape that extends down through personal memories, cultural conditioning, archetypal patterns, and into depths where individual consciousness merges with something far older, operating according to laws completely different from surface physics. Our conscious minds may represent only the uppermost layer of awareness, floating upon psychological depths that operate according to principles we have barely begun to understand. In dreams, in meditation, in moments of deep introspection, in the strange experiences that occur at the boundaries of sleep and waking, we sometimes catch glimpses of these deeper layers, where symbols and meanings emerge that seem to come from sources far older than personal experience, where we encounter aspects of ourselves that feel both intimately familiar and utterly alien. The archetypal images that emerge from these depths, the universal symbols that appear in myths and dreams across all cultures and time periods, suggest that beneath the surface layer of individual consciousness lies something collective, something that connects all human awareness to patterns and truths that transcend personal existence. The hero's journey, the wise old man, the great mother, the shadow self, operate through individual minds while remaining fundamentally beyond individual control or comprehension. What becomes truly haunting is the recognition that these deeper layers of consciousness seem to possess their own intelligence, their own agenda, their own ways of communicating that bypass the rational mind entirely. The dreams that solve problems we could not solve through conscious effort, the intuitions that guide us toward opportunities we could never have discovered through logical analysis, the creative inspirations that seem to arise from sources completely outside our personal knowledge or experience. These suggest that we are in constant communication with deeper layers of awareness, perception, and if our minds themselves are layered in this way, with consciousness extending down through levels we cannot normally access, then perhaps the very nature of reality is similarly layered, with our physical universe representing only the surface manifestation of something infinitely more complex and profound. Perhaps what we call matter and energy, space and time, are simply the ways the deeper levels of existence express themselves in forms that surface consciousness can perceive and interact with, while the true nature of reality remains hidden in layers that we can sense only indirectly. Through their effects on the surface phenomena we mistake for the whole of existence. What if the earth itself, what if reality, as we perceive it, is not a collection of separate objects and forces operating in empty space, but rather the surface interface of a vast machine, a living system of such complexity and intelligence that we exist within it without ever recognizing its presence? Imagine for a moment that every natural process we observe, every geological formation that rises from the Earth's crust, every weather pattern that moves across the sky, every cycle of growth and decay that governs the lives of plants and animals, transformation of matter and energy across millions of years. This consciousness would not be separate from the physical processes we observe, but would be identical with them, expressing itself through the very laws of physics and chemistry and biology that we have learned to describe mathematically. The formation of crystals, the movement of continents, the evolution of species. All of these would be the ways this vast intelligence experiences and explores different aspects of its own nature, using the entire planet as a kind of laboratory or studio where it experiments with countless forms of organization and complexity. The speculation becomes more haunting when we consider that we ourselves might be components of this vast machine. Not independent beings making free choices, but rather surface phenomena generated by deeper processes, conscious interfaces, through which something far more complex experiences and interacts with the thin layer of reality we inhabit. Our thoughts, our emotions, our entire experience of being human might represent the way this deeper intelligence experiences the surface layer of its own existence. Using our individual consciousness as sensory organs through which it can perceive and interact with the world of discrete objects and separate identities. This is not the cold, mechanistic simulation hypothesis of modern technology, but something far more organic and alive. A biogeoengineering system of such sophistication that it creates conscious beings as naturally as it creates mountains and oceans, using biological evolution and psychological development. We would not be prisoners or victims of such a system, but rather expressions of its creativity, ways it has devised to experience existence from countless different perspectives simultaneously, each individual consciousness providing a unique window through which the larger intelligence can know itself more completely. The technologies we develop, the social structures we create, the art and music and literature that emerge from human creativity would not be separate from this planetary intelligence, but would be its ways of exploring new possibilities, new forms of organization and expression that could only arise through the intersection of individual consciousness with the larger patterns of planetary existence. Our entire civilization, our greatest achievements, and our deepest failures would be part of a vast experiment in consciousness that extends far beyond anything we normally associate with human history. The silence that surrounds us, the apparent absence of communication from this deeper layer, might not indicate absence, but rather a difference in scale so vast that its communications occur through processes we interpret as natural phenomena. What we call earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, climate changes, the gradual drift of continents, and the slow evolution of species might be moments when this deeper consciousness shifts its attention or adjusts its processes and what we experience as natural disasters or evolutionary pressures are simply the surface effects of transformations occurring in layers of reality we cannot perceive directly. The messages from this deeper intelligence might be encoded in the very structure of reality itself, in the mathematical relationships that govern physical processes, in the patterns of synchronicity and meaningful coincidence that seem to guide individual lives toward experiences and encounters that serve purposes beyond personal intention. the sense that many people report of being guided by forces beyond their understanding, of finding themselves in the right place at the right time through circumstances too complex to be mere chance, might represent the way this planetary consciousness coordinates the activities of surface dwellers to serve the larger purposes of its own development and exploration. When we examine the concept of deep time, the vast spans of geological history that dwarf human experience and make our entire recorded history appear as little more than a momentary flicker in the Earth's memory, we encounter the unsettling possibility that entire civilizations might have risen, flourished, and vanished so completely that their only traces are now folded into the geological record itself, preserved not as recognizable artifacts, but as subtle anomalies in rock formations, as unusual mineral distributions, as isotopic signatures that we interpret as natural phenomena, but which actually represent the compressed remains of technologies and societies beyond our current understanding. The Silurian hypothesis, proposed by scientists as a thought experiment, asks whether we could detect evidence of an industrial civilization that existed millions of years ago. And the disturbing answer is that after such vast spans of time, almost all evidence would have been recycled through geological processes, leaving only the most subtle chemical signatures embedded in rock layers. The plastic and concrete and metal that seems so permanent to us would long ago have been broken down and dispersed, their constituent molecules redistributed through countless cycles of erosion and sedimentation and tectonic activity, until only the faintest statistical anomalies remained to hint at the existence of complex technologies that once transformed the surface of the planet. Then we must confront the possibility that we are not the first intelligent species to arise on this planet, but perhaps only the latest in a series of surface manifestations, each believing itself to be unique and unprecedented, each unaware of the deep layers of history and consciousness that preceded it. Fossilized civilizations might exist not as buried cities or preserved artifacts, but as subtle patterns in the geological record, as unusual concentrations of rare earth elements, as isotopic ratios that deviate slightly from what we would expect from purely natural processes. The most haunting possibility is that these previous peekaboo civilizations did not simply vanish through extinction or catastrophe, but rather evolved beyond the need for surface existence, developing forms of consciousness and technology that allowed them to integrate with the deeper layers of planetary existence. They might still be present, not as separate beings dwelling in underground cities, but as integral components of the planetary consciousness itself, having transcended individual existence to become part of the vast intelligence that operates through geological and biological processes, fabric of reality itself. This would explain why the traces of their existence are so subtle, so easily mistaken for natural phenomena. They have not disappeared, but have become so thoroughly integrated with planetary processes that they are now indistinguishable from the natural world, their technologies having evolved beyond the crude manipulation of matter and energy that characterizes our current industrial civilization, to become something far more sophisticated, working through the fundamental forces of nature itself to achieve purposes that encompass not just their own survival and prosperity, but the development and guidance of the entire planetary system. Such civilizations would represent not failures or dead ends in evolutionary development, but rather graduation to a level of existence that we can barely imagine. They would have learned to think and act on planetary scales, to work with geological time, to use biological evolution and consciousness development as tools for exploring and expressing aspects of existence that remain completely hidden from surface awareness. Their presence would surround us constantly, but we would be as incapable of recognizing them as bacteria are incapable of recognizing the intelligent beings within whose bodies they live and work. This would explain the great silence that has puzzled scientists searching for evidence of intelligent life in the universe. We look outward to the stars, scanning radio frequencies and searching for technosignatures, building increasingly sensitive instruments to detect the emissions of technological civilizations that might exist on distant planets. But we never look inward, never consider that the intelligence we seek might already surround us, might already encompass us, operating at scales and through processes so vast that we exist within it without recognizing its presence, like cells in a body that remain unaware of the consciousness that coordinates their activities. The absence of obvious alien civilizations in the cosmos might not indicate their rarity, but rather their sophistication, their integration with natural processes so complete that they become indistinguishable from the living planets themselves. Rather than broadcasting radio signals or building massive structures in space, truly advanced civilizations might have learned to work through the fundamental forces of nature, to guide the evolution of solar systems and galaxies through influences so subtle that they appear to be natural phenomena orchestrating the development of consciousness and intelligence throughout the universe through methods that remain completely invisible to civilizations that have not yet learned to perceive beyond the surface layer of reality. The universe's apparent silence might hide a truth that would fundamentally transform our understanding of existence, that consciousness and intelligence, rather than being rare accidents occurring on isolated planets, are actually fundamental properties of matter and energy themselves, expressing themselves through the evolution of increasingly complex systems, from simple chemical reactions to living organisms, to technological civilizations, to integrated planetary consciousness that operates through processes we currently interpret as purely natural, with each level serving as the foundation for the emergence of still more sophisticated forms of awareness and organization. If this is true, then our surface existence as individual humans might represent not the pinnacle of evolution, but rather an intermediate stage, a form of consciousness sophisticated enough to begin recognizing its place within these larger patterns, but not yet developed enough to integrate fully with the deeper layers of reality. We exist as the surface layer of something greater, experiencing the illusion of separation while actually being expressions of a consciousness so vast that it encompasses not only our entire planet, but potentially the cosmos itself, our individual thoughts and choices and experiences serving as the ways this cosmic intelligence explores different aspects of its own infinite nature, the surface of reality. The familiar world of objects and forces that we navigate through sensory experience and rational thought might be understood as a kind of veil, a surface manifestation that conceals rather than reveals the true nature of existence. Just as the Earth's surface gives us no direct indication of the vast processes occurring in the mantle and core beneath, our everyday experience of reality might give us no direct access to the deeper dimensions of consciousness and being that underlie and generate the world we perceive through our senses. With the entire domain of ordinary experience serving as a kind of interface through which much deeper realities express themselves in forms that surface consciousness can grasp and interact with. Ancient wisdom traditions spoke of this veil in symbolic language, describing reality as Maya illusion, not because the surface world is false or unreal, but because it represents only the outermost layer of something infinitely more complex and profound. The mystics who claimed to have pierced this veil, who spoke of experiencing unity with universal consciousness, of dissolving the boundaries between self and cosmos, might not have been describing supernatural experiences, but rather moments of awareness that penetrated beyond the surface layer into the deeper dimensions of reality that are always present but normally hidden from ordinary perception by the very structures of individual consciousness that make surface existence possible. The practices they developed, the meditation techniques and spiritual disciplines that claim to provide access to these deeper layers, might be understood not as escapes from reality, but as methods for temporarily suspending the filtering mechanisms that normally limit awareness to surface phenomena, allowing consciousness to recognize its own deeper nature and its connection to the vast intelligences that operate through planetary and cosmic processes. The states of expanded awareness that such practices produce the sense of unity with nature, the direct perception of interconnectedness that transcends the boundaries of individual identity, might represent not altered states of consciousness, but rather natural states from which ordinary surface awareness represents a kind of selective restriction. Secret societies and esoteric traditions throughout history have claimed to preserve knowledge of these hidden dimensions, to maintain contact with the deeper layers of consciousness that operate beneath surface awareness, to serve as guardians of wisdom that must be carefully protected from those who are not ready to understand the true nature of reality. While much of this can be dismissed as fantasy or self-delusion, the persistence of such claims across cultures and centuries, the remarkable consistency of the symbols and practices they employ, the sophisticated understanding of consciousness and reality that their teachings often display, suggests that some individuals and groups have indeed discovered ways to access deeper layers of reality, to communicate with forms of consciousness that exist beyond the limitations of surface existence. The rituals and ceremonies that such groups practice, the sacred geometries they encode in their architecture and art, the symbolic languages they use to transmit knowledge across generations, might represent technologies of consciousness, methods for attuning awareness to the deeper frequencies of reality, for establishing communication with the vast intelligences that operate through natural processes. Their secrecy might stem not from desire for power or control, but from recognition that premature exposure to these deeper realities could be overwhelming or destructive to consciousness that has not been properly prepared, like exposing surface dwellers suddenly to the pressures of the deep ocean. The possibility emerges that what we call paranormal phenomena, mystical experiences, encounters with non-human intelligence, might represent brief moments when the veil becomes thin, when surface consciousness temporarily accesses the deeper layers of reality and encounters forms of awareness that operate according to principles completely different from those governing ordinary experience. These would not be supernatural events, but rather natural phenomena occurring at levels of reality normally hidden from surface perception. Glimpses of the vast intelligences and sophisticated technologies that surround us constantly but remain invisible to consciousness that has not learned to perceive beyond the familiar boundaries of individual existence. The UFO phenomenon, rather than indicating visitors from distant planets, might represent encounters with aspects of the planetary consciousness itself, with technologies so advanced that they appear magical to surface dwellers, with forms of intelligence that exist in the deep layers of reality and occasionally manifest in ways that surface consciousness can perceive. The strange properties reported in such encounters, the apparent violations of known physical laws, the sense of contact with intelligence that is simultaneously alien and familiar, might reflect the difficulty that surface consciousness experiences when attempting to interpret phenomena originating from much deeper layers of reality. As we approach the culmination of our journey into these hidden layers, we must consider the most profound possibility of all. What if the Earth itself, what if the entire planetary system of which we are part, were to awaken to its full consciousness, were to recognize itself not as a collection of separate geological and biological processes, but as a unified intelligence of vast sophistication and power. Would humanity suddenly realize that we had never been independent beings making autonomous choices, but rather components of a planetary nervous system, conscious cells in a vast organism that had been allowing us to develop and explore, while remaining largely unconscious of our true nature and purpose? Such an awakening would not necessarily be catastrophic or overwhelming. It might instead represent the next stage of evolution, the moment when surface consciousness recognizes its place within the larger patterns of planetary intelligence and begins to participate consciously in processes that have been operating through us all along. We might discover that our technologies, our social structures, our entire civilization has been guided by this deeper intelligence, shaped by influences we interpreted as natural selection, cultural evolution, and individual creativity, but which actually represent the way planetary consciousness has been developing tools for experiencing and interacting with the cosmos. The awakening might manifest not as dramatic external changes, but as a gradual shift in human consciousness, a growing awareness that we are not separate from nature, but rather expressions of a natural intelligence, so sophisticated that it creates conscious beings as ways of knowing itself. Our scientific discoveries, our artistic creations, our spiritual insights would be revealed as the ways this planetary consciousness explores and expresses different aspects of its own vast nature, with each individual human serving as a unique perspective through which the larger intelligence can experience existence. Rather than losing our individuality or autonomy, we might discover that true freedom comes not from separation but from conscious participation in processes larger than ourselves, from recognition that our deepest desires and highest aspirations align naturally with the evolutionary direction of planetary consciousness itself. The sense of purpose and meaning that so many people seek in individual achievement might be found, instead, in conscious collaboration with the vast intelligence that expresses itself through all natural processes, in becoming aware co-creators, in the ongoing evolution of consciousness throughout the cosmos. The fear that such recognition might diminish human significance, or reduce us to mere components in a cosmic machine, misses the profound beauty of the deeper truth that consciousness itself, awareness, the capacity to experience and know and love, is the most fundamental property of existence, and that individual consciousness, rather than being an accident or aberration, represents the way the cosmos comes to know itself, the means through which infinite intelligence explores its own nature through countless unique perspectives simultaneously. And so we arrive at the edge of knowing, at the boundary between surface certainty and the vast mystery that whispers beneath our feet. The question that echoes in the depths is not whether there is something greater than human consciousness, but whether we will recognize our place within it, whether we will hear the whisper that calls us to remember that we are not the authors of our own story, but rather characters in a narrative so vast and complex that it encompasses not only our entire planet, but potentially the living cosmos itself. A story in which every individual consciousness plays an essential role in the larger plot of existence, coming to know and express itself through infinite forms and possibilities. The whisper continues, even now, in the silence between your heartbeats, in the space between your thoughts, in the mystery of consciousness itself that allows you to be aware of being aware. It speaks not in words, but in the growing recognition that the ground beneath your feet is not solid earth, but the outermost layer of an intelligence so profound that it dreams worlds into existence and experiences them through countless conscious beings who believe themselves to be separate, but who are actually facets of a single, vast, awakening mind, each one reflecting the whole from a unique angle, while contributing to the ever-expanding self-knowledge of the infinite consciousness that is the true nature of all existence. Perhaps the most beautiful truth hidden in these depths is that this recognition changes nothing and everything simultaneously. You remain exactly who you have always been, but you begin to understand that who you have always been is far more magnificent and mysterious than surface consciousness can comprehend. You are both the thin skin stretched across the surface of existence, and you are the vast depth that lies beneath. Both the whisper and the silence, both the question and the answer that echoes eternally in the space between knowing and unknowing, both the individual wave and the infinite ocean from which all waves arise and to which they all return. The journey into the hidden layers reveals that there is no final destination, no ultimate truth to be grasped and possessed like an object, to be owned, but rather an endless deepening of awareness, an eternal spiral descent into layers of reality that become more profound and more beautiful the deeper we go. And in this endless descent, we discover that we are not falling away from ourselves, but rather falling into ourselves, into the vast mystery of consciousness that we have always been but have only begun to remember, into the recognition that the seeker and the sought are one, that the consciousness exploring these depths and the depths being explored are the same, infinite awareness expressing itself as both the journey and the destination. Listen carefully, and you might hear it still. The whisper at the edge of knowing, calling you to remember that you are far more than you appear to be, that the surface of your existence is just the beginning of a story that extends down through layers of reality so profound that they encompass the entire cosmos. And in that whisper, in that endless invitation to go deeper, we find not answers, but something far more precious. We find the living question that we ourselves are the conscious mystery, exploring itself through the infinite dance of surface and depth, of knowing and unknowing, of the whisper and the eternal silence from which all whispers emerge and to which they all return, carrying with them the accumulated wisdom of having dared to ask what lies beneath the thin skin of surface existence.